Welcome to this week's video, guys. As you can see, we have a very large panel to paint today. If you don't know, or if you missed last video, I explained that right now I'm preparing for an upcoming group show. I said my goal is to create 3 large works. Last week we created 1, and there's 1 large work that I have left over from my graduation show that didn't sell. So once I paint this, I'll have 3, and then I'll create a bunch of other small work. But right now we're focusing on this one. I already have an idea in mind of what I want to create for this painting. I have a study that I've been working on for a couple of weeks now. Different color palette, different vibe. Very, very exciting. And let's just get into it.
So, welcome to my iPad. We are using the app Procreate. We always do. I'm quickly sketching out what I'm thinking for this painting. So I had this idea of having like these 2 figures sitting in this sort of scene. One of them is crouching down or laying down, and there's a older protective figure sitting above her, sort of looking out, trying to figure out what's going on. But obviously I don't know how to draw a side profile, so we need some photo references. So I got my 2 amazing sisters to help model for me and to use as a basis for the painting. As you can see, we took a bunch of photos. Even though I had a really curated game plan going into it, there were just tiny little things that needed to be adjusted in every photo that we took, so that things don't look super awkward like this. So as time went on, we got a little bit more natural and finally landed on this photo. I thought that everything about it seemed really well placed. Nothing looked awkward or stood out too much besides this hand on her ankle that just looks a little bit weird, so I'm just gonna cut that out. But overall, really happy with it, happy with the lighting, and I think by the end everyone was relieved that we were done. So I just popped the image into my original sketch and just overlaid it and cut out the background so that I had the color that I wanted to be sort of the key color in this painting to shine through, and everything lined up pretty well. I mean, my sketch was not at all atomically correct, but in terms of the pose, I think we were able to recreate it pretty well. Now, I had a good game plan when it came to the poses, but I had no idea what I was going to do with the background, and so it took a lot of trial and error. We had this at the beginning. I don't know what this is, so I just scrapped that, and then I kind of did like a similar thing, this sort of forest landscape, woods, again continuing that green that I was really into, and then I sort of tossed between the 2, didn't know which one I preferred, didn't really like either of them, so scrapped that, started again. I was gonna do this like pattern floor thing, that didn't work, or this shadow, I don't even know what that was, and then I blocked in this horizon line, and everything just fell into place from here. It was exactly what I was looking for. It turned into this desert abandoned landscape and sketched in some of the vegetation and deserty textures. Now, the top figure was a little bit too vertical and too aligned with the bottom figure, if that makes sense. There wasn't much of a flow between the 2, so I just shifted over the top figure to the left a little bit. This was actually my mom's suggestion, so thank you, Mom, but it did leave now a gap between the top figure and the bottom figure, and so I kind of have to make up the connection between the 2. But don't worry, you'll see me struggle so much with this later on, and now I think that it flows so much better and there's an easier relationship between the 2, and this is the study that we have to work with. I really like the colors, I like the vibe, I like the storytelling. However, there is one glaring issue, and that is the composition. The horizontal line just absolutely leads the viewer's eye off the panel, and so I needed some direction, bring the eye back towards the figures and pull it back towards the left. So what I decided to do was put these chimneys in the back and have the smoke point inward. So now we have the arm of the top figure flow with the leg of the bottom figure up towards the chimneys, and then the chimneys points back over to the top figure, and so your eyes are kind of going in a circular motion rather than it going from the left to the right and just completely falling off the panel. And now that we finally have a study to work with, we can begin painting. And so I've got my panel, I've got my palette, and I start off, of course, with my acrylic base, and I use some glazing medium as well to mix in with the acrylic just to thin it down, but not too thin so that the acrylic paint doesn't stick to my panel. It's got another medium in there, plus water, of course. And once that base layer of that neon green was down, I just mixed up some darker green, the green that actually inspired this painting. It's sort of a sage green. And I used this printmaking roller. You guys have seen this a million times, but it creates such an awesome texture, really authentic and earthy. And I absolutely love the way that this darker green layers on top of the lighter green. It just adds these pockets of brightness throughout the painting. And now that I had a base, I can now actually begin painting something on this panel. So I went in and blocked that horizon line. And this horizon line felt like it was going on on forever, it made me realize how big this panel is. The dimensions is 93 by 122 centimeters, so very, very, very large for me, which is fun because I don't always get to paint large, and with a scene this complicated, if the panel was any smaller, I probably would have just started to get super frustrated and wanted to give up. So the fact that it's this size, I'm able to do more complicated scenes, which is really fun for me. I then also started to block in the figures. I sort of glazed in the top figure because I knew that she's going to be not as rendered as the bottom figure, and then I just went in and sketched in the bottom figure. And because the scene is so complicated, like these are two interacting figures in this context of a landscape, I know that it's going to take me a few tries to get this sketch right. So I'm using just a slightly darker color than the background just to have a basis to work off of, and then I can slowly get darker with my colors as I get more confident with my strokes and can really lock in those details. The first round of the sketching process is done, and now I can go in with a slightly darker green and correct some of the portions. As you can see, I got the horizon line wrong. It needed to be a little bit higher, so I'm using that darker green and adding a few more details the more confident I get with the sketch. So here you can see I needed to shift this figure over a little bit more to the left. So if I had gone in straight with a really dark line, I won't be able to get that beautiful texture that we made at the beginning back, because I actually want that paint roller texture and that green base that we made to peek through, especially in the top half of the painting. And because I want this underpainting to peek through, I add the sketch very, very gradually just to avoid the feeling of I went too far and I covered up too much. But as you can see, I'm getting a little bit more confident with my sketch, and I'm attempting to block in the stripes of the shirt. And I knew as soon as I started painting this, I kind of regret it, because even this little quick rough in of the sketch took me so long that I actually had to step aside and take a break and do something else. So I started to block in a little bit of the landscape and rough in some of the vegetation and cityscape in the background. It'll become a little bit clearer later on what is actually happening in this background. And while I was in the middle of painting and filming, my light broke. It actually burnt out because I was just using it so much and it was on for very long periods of time. But my dad actually fixes it for me, so just for a little bit, the lighting is not going to be the best, but it does come back and it gets better, I promise. So once we had the sketch locked in, I went in and started keying in some of these colors. So I went with that green color for the background and then a warm skin tone, which is what I have for my study, but when I took a step back, everything just sort of blurred together and I just felt it was too green, so I went back to my study and decided I was going to play around with some of these color options, and I tried a red background and a green skin tone, and everything just clicked. It's applied a lot more contrast with the complementary colors of the green and the red. I also pushed back the top figure a little bit more, and also upping the contrast, creating this glow around her, so she's more of like a ghostly figure, which I think adds to the narrative of this piece. And like I said before, that sage green color is really what started this piece. It's what inspired me to make it, and so in the original study, I just put it absolutely everywhere, in the sky, in the foreground, everywhere. But flicking between the old study and the new study, I feel like that green now stands out more, even though there's less of it, if that makes sense. I think because it was everywhere, you didn't really see it, but supplying the red as a contrast makes that green stand out more, and it's now actually what I wanted the green to be. I also think the green supplied a different narrative. It's sort of like a fresh, it has like nature and health connotations with it, whereas the sandy, rusty color reminds me of rust, which is this sort of decayed, not looked after, old and worn out connotations with it, which is what I think the figures are experiencing trekking through this desert, rather than it being a fresh, vibrant green landscape. I just think it suits the narrative that I was going for a lot more and makes sense for what they're experiencing. And so now that the acrylic base is done and I've let it dry for about 12 to 24 hours just to make sure that it's fully cured before I go in now with the oil painting. So I started over at the legs and I went in with that green tone that's similar to the sky just to supply a bit of cohesion from the top of the painting to the bottom of the painting. I also added some of the red dirt color to her kneecaps because what I want to do is really convince the audience that this figure actually lives in this environment and it's not just my sister that I took a photo indoors. I put some of the red dirt on her kneecaps because I figured that if she has been trekking through this desert, she would have maybe knelt at one point or slept on this dirt at one point or just got it somewhere on her body to indicate that she has been living amongst this desert over a period of time. And maybe people won't notice that sort of stuff, but I feel like the small little details added up do make a big difference in the end, especially when it comes to me trying to achieve realism in a non-realistic setting. Like, this desert doesn't exist and her skin tone is obviously not green, but it's these tiny little things where it's realistic in its rendering, but it's also realistic in what they're experiencing and how I'm able to communicate that. So I did the same thing in the bottom of her feet because if she's walking through this desert, she's obviously going to get red dirt on the bottom of her feet. So I made sure that I put that warm tone just on the parts of the feet that make contact with the ground. So I kind of had to sort of like close my eyes and visualize, okay, if the foot is laying on the ground, what is going to pick up that red pigment? So I just put it on the areas like the soles and the bases of the toes, just areas that make contact with the ground. Shifting over to the other side of the painting now where I'm painting the other foot, but this time it's a sock. What's going on? This doesn't make any sense. She's only wearing one sock. If you saw my last video, you probably maybe recognize a little motif that's going on where I only put one sock on the person that I'm painting. Why is this? Do we know? Do I know? No, I actually don't know why this is. There's not really a meaning behind it. I can probably make one up right now, but I don't want to lie to you. It's basically because I want the person to look a little bit less put together. If the person is wearing two socks, I feel like it looks a little bit curated and posed. Whereas if they put only one sock on, something seems a bit off, and they're obviously in a position where they didn't plan to be. So that's kind of the reason behind it, but if you want to interpret it another way, feel free. But now we are moving over to this stripy shirt. Now, I don't want to be dramatic, but this nearly killed me. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. I have done so many stripes before. I did like a whole series on stripes. And I stopped because it takes this long. Like this clip right here, it's not slowed down, it's not sped up. This is exactly what it was like. Drawing out these stripes, making sure it's the correct proportions, because if one of the stripes are off, then it sets off a domino effect and the rest of the stripes are off. And so I had to be so careful and so precise in making sure that everything is drawn out perfectly. So as you can imagine, it took a long time, so we're just kind of gonna skip ahead to me having drawn out as best as I possibly can the entire t-shirt. Obviously some of the portions were off and I did have to go in when I did the second layer and repaint it to correct the proportions. And this was me in the middle of it talking through the process. Alright, so all morning and now into the afternoon, I've spent my time kind of doing a second layer on this t-shirt here. It's coming along nice. However, I started this at 9 o'clock. It's now nearly 3 o'clock. So nearly 6 hours I've spent just on this sleeve here. I've not even finished the sleeve. It's just that I've spent. And it's rare that I have like full days that I can just paint. Usually I have to go to work or go to something else. So the fact that I've spent like nearly an entire day of my day to paint just on the sleeve is making me panic a little bit because I have all the rest to do. And it's not like I'm not enjoying it. I mean, it's not my favorite. I'm very much looking forward to painting a face. Yeah, anyway, I think I'm gonna have to paint into the night just to see how far I can get because boy oh boy, it cannot be taking me this long. Anyway, I'm gonna continue and I'll probably film a lot of the process because I haven't filmed any of this. I don't know why. I'm like, oh, it'll only take me a second. I don't need to film it. Ooh. I don't want to know how long the time lapse is going to be. And so I continued the rest of the sleeve, which did take me into the night. I don't know when I went to bed, but it was pretty late. But that was a more complicated part of the t-shirt. Like that sleeve had a lot of creases and wrinkles, so the rest of it was pretty smooth sailing. But I just kept my head down and I kept going. And because what I was doing was so repetitive, it was the same shape and color the whole way through, that I would sometimes enter like these flow states and kind of turn my brain off and just kind of go in autopilot for a little bit. So it was an interesting experience. I kind of meditated, I guess, for a sec, which was pretty cool, but I will have to double check myself when I consider doing strips again, even though I just love the way that it turns out. I just don't know in the long run if it's the best idea. So after so many days of being super tight and restrictive in my painting with the shirt, I thought I'd just completely shift gears and work on the background for a little bit just to loosen up and smear a bunch of paint around, basically, which is how I kind of create my backgrounds. It's just a bunch of paint smeared. So I mixed together a wash thinning out my oil paint with some paint thinner and basically just creating an abstract painting. So I'm just going for it and smearing a whole bunch of different colors around. And in this process, it really did solidify that changing the background color to red was the right choice. The colors that I got to use were so much fun, and when I sort of blended it all together, they just radiate and they kind of reflect and bounce back at you. And me changing up the color choices midway through the painting is something that I never do. I kind of get so stuck on the study and I just want to make it exactly how it is because that's the plan. But I'm super happy I changed it and really, really love the colors and what it does for the vibrancy of this painting. Finally, getting to work on this face felt like a little treat for me. This is the only full face in this entire painting, and I like to say that I'm a portrait figurative painter, so everything else in this painting doesn't ever compare to painting a face. So I really wanted to take my time and enjoy myself, as this is obviously the best part. As you can see, or maybe you don't really notice, but the skin tone is a little bit different. You guys know that I kind of like to change up the skin tones. We're kind of going for that green skin tone, as I said before in the study that I made. I've only done a similar skin tone like this once before, so I wasn't super versed in how to do it, and honestly when I did it that one time it was kind of on a whim, so I was kind of just winging it and some things weren't actually working out. Excuse me trying to get cat hair out of the painting. My cats have been with me through this entire painting, so they're bound to make their appearance somewhere. But back to what I was saying, so the trouble that I had with this particular skin tone was the transition from the warmer areas of her face, such as this ear. I also had it in the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, to the cooler areas of her face, so the actual sort of skin tone is an overall green hue. And so transitioning from reds to the opposite color, which is greens, makes it really difficult because they're the opposite colors, and so when you try to blend them, it gets all muddy, and that was something that I just struggled with a lot. So I just blocked in the first layer of the face and the hair for now. Gave myself a bit of a break just to regroup and to rethink how I'm gonna approach going in with the second pass. So in the meantime, I moved on to the top half of the painting. Now I bought a new printmaking roller. This is slightly smaller than the one I was using before, the only one that I had, and I was really excited to go in and start carving out some of the skin tones of this top figure, which I haven't even touched yet. Now with this top half of the painting, I made it very clear to myself that I am not to overwork it. That's why initially I went in with the roller, and now I'm going in with the brush just so I can try and remind myself to keep it loose and keep it painterly, because I wanted the figure to blend in with the background, which is also a printmaking roller texture. Because what I was really worried about was that the figures are gonna look like a magazine cutout in comparison to the background, but what I really wanted was for the figures to look a part of the landscape. And that's hard to do because not only is the landscape made up, but I didn't take the photo outside, so I figured that if I physically merge the figure and the background together and blur it as one, I would avoid that sort of Photoshop cutout look. Now we're doing a second pass on this background here, and I worked from the very back where the chimneys are all the way to the front. And because I already had the chimneys in there, I thought, okay, that's some sort of man-made object. It's not just going to be a natural desert. There's going to be some signs of civilization out there, which I think adds to the narrative, because then it looks like that these two figures have run from someone or something or some sort of society, and that's why they're kind of abandoned out here. But when I say I painted a city in the background, it means I've just painted a bunch of squares. That's basically it. Moving back over to this face now for its second pass. I'm just oiling out the dry paint so that when I apply the second layer, everything blends a lot smoother and it brings back some of the original values that I had before it dried. Now the second pass went a lot smoother. I feel like I got a bit of a practice run with that first layer. And you might be thinking, Saskia, well, why don't you just not include any of the red parts of the face and just do a green so you don't struggle with all the transitions? I spoke about this in the last video, but having the same warm areas that would occur on someone with an actual realistic skin tone occur also in in my non-naturalistic skin tone makes the person look more alive and more real. If I were just to do an overall green face and have no other variation in its hue, the person would look quite dead. And I want my paintings to look possible, like this could actually possibly be real, and these could actually possibly be real people in this possible landscape. So that's kind of why I do it, just to make them look a little bit more alive. Going in again with the printmaking roller on this top figure, I'm also going in with a brush because certain areas of this top figure do need to be refined as well, such as the parts where it makes contact with the bottom figure, because the bottom figure is super crisp and clear, that I also need to make her hand that's in contact with her also quite crisp and refined because they're in the same foreground area. But if you remember, originally I had to shift over this top figure to the left, and a repercussion of that was that I had to then tilt her wrist back down to make contact with her neck, because originally it was tilted up on her head. And so now her wrist is at a very awkward angle, and I had to kind of make up what I thought her wrist was going to look like. So I had to add parts to her hand that originally weren't there. It was originally covered up by the head. So it went through some really awkward stages. So as you can see, that palm of the hand that's connected to the pinky is weirdly squashed and merged with the bottom figure's t-shirt. I didn't know how to join that wrist part with her t-shirt. That was, I think, the biggest issue. So stepping away from that, I moved on to other parts of the painting that needed a little bit of a touch-up, such as adding a few details to the top figure's hair, adding this sort of angelic glow and sparkle to her hair and her shoulder, just to make it look like that she's illuminated and sort of see-through in a way. Another little detail to this bottom figure's face is that I'm adding a red glaze to make it look like that she's sunburnt, because this is me again trying to communicate a narrative. If this figure has run away from this sort of civilization, she's escaped from them, she only has one sock on and she's all disheveled, she probably forgot her SPF. So I imagine she got a bit burnt through her trek through this desert. Also putting that desert red color on her forehead, because I imagine that the light bounces down from the red ground and reflects some of the redness back onto her face. Again, this is me trying to make it look like these figures are really part of the environment and not just taken in a random room in my house. So reflected light for me really helps achieve that. As you can see here, after many attempts, I fixed the wrist in the background. I now think it looks a lot better. Also changed the hair to make it look like that she's blonde. If you remember, she used to have this really dark black hair, but I figure if she's outside in the scorching sun, it may have lightened the top part of her hair. Now the sock is very much dry, as it was one of the first things that we did on this painting. I'm adding some of that red desert color to the bottom of her foot like I did with the other one. Again, continuing that narrative of time and how long she's been spending in this desert, she would have gotten some of that sand on the bottom of her foot. Getting to this foreground section and painting in all vegetation was one of the last things left to do on this painting. I just slapped on a bunch of paint and smushed it all together. It's basically it. And then in the background, I also painted in these chimneys. Now with these chimneys, they don't only help with the composition in pulling the viewer's eye back towards the figures, they also created an atmosphere of smokiness and really pushed this top figure back. But to do this, I had to sort of paint over the figure that I spent a very long time painting. So I took a deep breath, mourned the possible loss of this figure, and painted straight over the top of it. And you'll see at the end how much I think this adds to the painting. Now the last thing we have to do on this painting, the very last thing, is that I wanted to attempt a glaze on these legs. Now these legs, if you remember, were the first thing that I did. And since then, I feel like I got a bit of a handle on how to paint the skin tone. And when I look back on these legs, as it was the first thing that I did, I think they're a bit too green. I couldn't really get Shrek out of my head, so I went in with a sort of bronzy color and an actual skin tone just to sort of neutralize that green a little bit. And if you see the before and after, it did help. It didn't do as much as I wanted, but I do think it helps be a little bit more cohesive with the rest of the skin tone. And like I said, that was the last thing I had to do. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you stayed to the end, a special shout out to you. I know it was a long one, but here was the final reveal of The Condemned, is what I've called it. Stay tuned to the end to hear my final thoughts. Okay, and just like that, we're done. I am so ecstatic that I finally finished this painting. It was one of those paintings where it felt like it was kind of never ending because there was all these tiny little things where you would spend forever on, but overall it wouldn't make that much of a difference. I'm talking about the shirt, the foot, the face, the hand, like tiny little things like that just took like full days of painting. And I step back and I feel like I haven't achieved anything. But by the end, it really did come together. The study that I made at the beginning, I was so set on, and I'm really happy that I didn't stick to the study fully. That first study that I made, which was having this area actually be green and the sky also green and her also green, making the background red and changing all of these things. I kind of threw me because usually once I make the study, I kind of stick to it. But I'm really happy that I didn't stick to it because in the long run, I knew I wasn't going to be happy with it. The red desert in the background was quite enjoyable. I'm not a landscape painter. You guys probably know this by now. But I do love putting my figures in landscape environments or in just some sort of setting. So I'm really happy that I'm pushing myself to feel more confident with doing that. But the landscape isn't a landscape in my opinion. When you look closer, it's just a bunch of paint smeared everywhere. It's super messy, it's super loose, but I think the looseness provides a nice contrast to make these parts stand out, which is what I want to stand out, not the landscape. I love all the little details. We have the one sock motif continued. Having tiny little details that continue the storyline that I want to express is really, really important to me, such as putting the red tone of the dirt on her foot, the bottom of her sock, and like on her knees to make it look like that she has been trekking through this desert. Those little details really put herself into that environment and makes it more believable for the audience. Also making it look like that there's sunburn in their face continues that narrative. I made her hair more blondish to make it look like that she has been in the scorching sun for so long that it's like lightened her hair. Little things like that are so fun for me to change, to alter the situation that they're in and provide not only realistic rendering but realistic storytelling. And I think that's pretty much all that I have to say. Please leave me any sort of suggestions or overall comments if you like this painting. If you don't like this painting, please let me know down below. And with all that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.